Okay. Good evening, everyone. Let's call the meeting of the Housing Planning and Development Committee to order for Monday, March 25, 2024. I'd like to move first that we approve the minutes of the meeting from March 18, 2024 of the committee.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. That brings us to, well, we've got 3 items on the agenda tonight. Really, one is the focus, in my opinion, although feedback from committee members. We've got 2 on adult use marijuana ordinances 4-2024 and 5-2024. But, excuse me, no, 3-2024 and 4-2024. Actually, I'm incorrect. Okay. So we've got a presentation tonight on 3-24 and 4-24, which is the TIF, as Councilman Baker just pointed out, for the property at Liberty. But we've also got ordinance 5-2024 regarding the licensed real estate broker proposal to market various real properties owned by the city that we began discussing last session. Let me quickly do some housekeeping. Director Leininger, you've got a presentation that looks like teed up on the screen. How many minutes will that presentation take approximately? And do we have people tonight to discuss, in addition to the administration, that proposal?
We do. Drew Siley, who is here representing Liberty Development. And then the presentation itself is probably about 10 minutes, with then, of course, giving Mr. Siley a chance to come and speak regarding the request that has been in front of the city and city council, and then a question and answer following that.
Okay, so we've got an hour tonight. We should, I'm sure, reserve a good 20, 30 minutes for that discussion, but we've also got this other ordinance regarding the real estate broker. The council clerk let me know we have some speakers tonight. Is it on one or all 3? Okay. So what I'd like to do is start with 5-2024 and see if we can quickly move through that portion of the discussion tonight, and then reserve the balance of the time for what's on screen. Any thoughts, council members?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and to clarify, I spoke with the law department, and it's best that since my wife is on the board of a tenant of one of the properties that is in this ordinance, that I would not comment or vote on any legislation that includes that property.
Okay, thanks for stating that for the record and for getting that clear. So on 5-2024, this is a proposal to, for the city, enter into an agreement with a real estate broker for a series of properties listed in the ordinance owned by the city to get bids, and then to potentially dispose of those bids. What I'd like to do, I think there are a number of members of the public, if we could hear from them right now and keep it relatively succinct, because we're going to, the time's going to go before we know it. Yes, Mr. Schackner? Okay, so do we have a sign-in sheet, or we don't, and we just are going to invite people to join us? I think it's the latter. So I recognize a couple members of the community that I know may be here to talk about that ordinance. Would you like to approach the podium and speak? Please do, in any particular order. I mean, I can call on people, but go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you so much. My name is Allison Urbanik. Tonight I am representing Barton Communities, 14300 Detroit Avenue. And I've really enjoyed the conversation that has come over the past few meetings regarding the ordinance for several properties, including the Lawther Center. And some feedback that I'd like to share is that we are really looking forward to a transparent process. That's to help even the playing field. I know that part of this focus will be to widen the net and get as many great opportunities as possible. But as a nonprofit that doesn't have a huge budget, we want to ensure that we are able to ensure that all proposals are received, obviously ones that are in good standing. And then we'd like to have more clarity around the broker's responsibility in reviewing and sharing offers that come through. And then we'd also like to know more about the end use, and will that be taken into consideration throughout the process with the broker. So we are thankful for the time and effort that everyone is putting into this, and we know that ultimately this will lead to the best end use of the property, and we look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bannock. And I also note your colleague, Don Heckelmoser, provided an electronic comment that's on the agenda in Granicus for members of the city and city council. I don't know if we could display that or not, but I'll briefly summarize the portion of his feedback is, with sections 3 and 4 in this proposed ordinance, the sections authorize the administration to complete the sale of the listed parcels without specifying the process by which offers will be assessed. As an interested party and resident, I suggest removing those completely or modifying them to include the following. How will the broker seek proposals offers? How long will they be accepted for? What will the value how will the value of a proposal or offer to compare or offer be compared to another? And then will the final use of the required of the property be revealed or considered as part of the offer? And will an offer that includes an option agreement be regarded as a valid offer? So that gets into the sale and disposal of the property questions, and I think some of those are valid points to raise. Right now, the draft is fairly simple and says the director, the mayor, or either the director of planning, the mayor, the director of law, or their designee is directed to enter into agreements and execute all ancillary and related instruments for the sale of said real property upon presentation of acceptable offer as determined by the director. And that in section 4, the director is authorized to negotiate and make counter proposals. So that's the sections that public comment is directed towards. Any other members of the public here to talk on this particular ordinance, which is the broker proposal? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Maridel Couture. I'm a Lakewood resident and a board member of Barton Communities. I just wanted to support what Allison has described for you today, and then also to highlight that affordable housing for older adults in our county and in our city should be a priority. And if that's a possibility for the development of this property, I would definitely hope that council and city would consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Tricia. I'm here on behalf, I'm the board president of Lakewood Child Care Center, and I'm here on their behalf just to emphasize with council and the city planners that.
And Lakewood Child Care Center is at
At
which
1450
address?
Bell, sorry,
Wonderful,
thank you for
thank
clarifying. That we've had a desire to grow the center within the building, and I know we've talked about and sent a letter over to the city previously about that, and we want to do that if it makes financial and operational sense as a nonprofit. We have a strong interest in the future of the building, and we've already put a lot of money into improvements in the building over the last 30 years. And as a nonprofit, we hope the city will see us as a partner in serving the families of Lakewood, and consider a separate discussion with leadership to talk through possible plans for the future if needed. And as we know, I mean, childcare is kind of in crisis across the country, and in Ohio, there was recently a grant that came across Holly's desk at the center, and we really didn't have the opportunity to apply for that because we wouldn't be able to expand our infant room quick enough with the limited space we have at 1450. And so again, we've expressed the desire to expand within the building, and we're really invested in making sure that we can stay there, be central in the city, and continue to support families in Lakewood. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public here to speak? Please join us if you are. I'm moving fast like a New York City auctioneer because we're trying to fit in a lot. Ms. Warren.
I'm Julie Warren. I'm a Lakewood resident, 1249 Virginia Avenue, and I echo the sentiments of the prior presenters in terms of the transparency, affordable housing, and the end-use results. But I am here today wearing my Lakewood Alive hat, so I just want you to know that that's who I'm representing, and that that's the way our board feels that we are supporting these endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? This side of the room? We don't want to have just this side. Okay. Council members, any comments at this point? Councilman Schachtner? Okay. So I appreciate the discussion. What I'd like to do is kind of continue the through line of our discussion last time, which is that, first of all, we welcome this proposal from the administration. There's a difference in class between commercial properties and the residential properties that we have, and for sure the Bell Avenue property, which is distinct from the Madison Avenue properties. One is a vacant lot, the other is a vacant building with significant maintenance backlog. So two of those commercial properties are things that need development. The other commercial property is one that's healthy functioning, largely occupied, and in a key portion of the downtown. So in my view, our residential properties that we list here are in a different category, and what I'd like to do is propose that the committee bifurcates or handles those differently, starting with 1450 Bell Avenue. So what I'd like to do is move that we strike 1450 Bell Avenue from the list of addresses in Section 1.
Permanent.
Including the permanent parcel numbers, that entire lower row on screen.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Council members of the administration? Now, the intent of this is not to end discussion of this, but rather just to position ourselves to handle it in a different manner. Okay. Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. One abstention and no no's, so that motion carries. Same conversation for 16016 to 024 Madison and 16021 Madison. Invite some discussion from council colleagues on whether those should also be in or not, not in this ordinance.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilman Baker.
Now that 1450 Bell is out of this ordinance, I can comment. So what I would suggest, and in line with your comments, the residential properties will be used as residential properties. They will substantially stay the same. There won't be much change in physical appearance and use of them. So they could be handled, pursuant to this legislation as hiring a real estate agent and simply selling them. And I think it's important that we kind of look to particularly Section 15507 of the codified ordinances and what it talks about when it talks about the sale of property by the city. It says that if you look at the code, it says you have to follow all of these procedures about newspaper bids and kind of really a formal process. But it says council can also approve a truncated process, but they have a lot of control over how that process looks. So in the spirit of that, in talking to the planning department about particularly 16016 and 16024 Madison, and then 16021 Madison, so what we locally call the Hilliard Theater property and the Lawther Center, council, the way the administration envisages the process is that the council member whose ward it's in, and then maybe another council person will be involved in the scoring, kind of the review of offers. So I would make a motion to amend this legislation to kind of formalize that so that it is in the legislation. And what I would seek to do, and I can send the clerk this language, is at the end of Section 3, I would seek to add, as it relates to permanent parcel numbers 312-24024 and 313-14007, parentheses, commercial properties. The director shall include council member blank and council member blank. We can talk about who we want that to be. In the review, consideration, deliberation, scoring, if applicable, and possible approval of any offers associated with the commercial properties. So it would essentially formalize in the legislation what the planning department has told us they intend to do with these properties.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Again, I would like to offer a friendly amendment.
Yes.
to that. In the two blanks, since it's, I believe it is, and Director Leininger, correct me if I'm wrong, since it's a common practice to include the council president and also the member of council whose ward the property is located in, I would offer a friendly amendment that those blanks be replaced with the council president and the member of council where the properties reside, or whatever language. In the
The member of council in whose ward the parcel
properties
is located.
located. So if that's agreeable as a friendly amendment, you could accept it.
Okay,
Or-
so you're making that motion.
Sure.
Okay, I'll second the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Free discussion here and feedback from planning director and others in the administration.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I would just say that, as the councilman pointed out, that is our process. Typically, it is just one member of council, and it's usually the ward member after we reach out to the council president to obtain that permission. But this is consistent with all the conversations we've had up to this point.
Okay. Any other comments from members of council?
If the council president doesn't want to do it, I'd certainly do it, but I leave that to her discretion.
So the council President Keppel, what if we said the council president or designee? Would that be acceptable to the council president?
Sure, that lets me make a decision either way, so that will
Okay,
work for me.
okay.
Yeah.
So, so let's make a friendly amendment to the motion, which is that the blank shall be filled in by the council president or designee, or his or her designee, and the second blank,
Say the ward council. If we know it's in Ward 2.
and the second blank will be by the Ward 2 councilman, okay, council person. Okay, so that's the motion that I've amended, and that's the motion I'm making. Are you going to second?
Second.
Okay, seconded. Now we're discussing that again. Any further commentary that we need to think through here?
I would just say, I mean, it's up for discussion, of course, that, this process still, at the end of the day, the approval doesn't come back to council. And I was curious if that was something that any members were seeking or interested in, that any final approval of the sale of this particular property or other properties have to require further legislative authority to be completed.
Personally, I do. This is a middle ground, I suppose, a stance of that. So the best form, I think, would be that the decision-making working group that would include 2 members of council would communicate back to the full body prior to any final sale being executed. That would be short of requiring a piece of legislation to come back to us. Other discussion? Councilman Baker?
Yeah, I certainly see the intent of where Councilman Schechner's kind of comment is going. And I weigh this, it's administrative efficiency and kind of council oversight. And I think about this in my day job where, I'm on the staff side, not on the board council side. And knowing that we will have 2 members of council considering those proposals and being involved in the deliberation, I think that is a fair compromise, and that it will produce buy-in about what the best result is. And this is going to be a challenging process. Anytime you're picking who's going to buy a property, it's a challenging process. But our aim as a city shouldn't be, and I hope our council colleagues in the administration understands this, isn't just about who's going to pay the most money, but what the end use of the property is, how it looks for the city going forward in 2, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So I know you know, I think it's a compromise that's adequate, but
Okay,
3 members.
thank you. Any other discussion? Council President Keppel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I sort of balancing that, Councilman Baker's point, the efficiency with the oversight, I think this is a good compromise. One question I would have is in terms of process is once the proposals come in, and this may be Director Leininger, I'm not sure who can best answer this, Director Varga, but once those proposals come in, what is the, what would the process look like, and how restricted are we from sharing out any of the details of those proposals?
So I'll speak to the process, and then as far as the restrictions on sharing information, I'll leave that to legal counsel, because there, certainly you might expect there's going to be some confidential information that might be shared through that process. But the process that we establish with a broker will be very transparent for everybody, and everybody who's going to be seeking to submit a proposal to that will be very clear on what it is that we're asking and how their proposals are going to be evaluated. We talked at the last meeting about the criteria, and is it just going to be evaluation-based criteria, or is this going to be more of a qualitative? And the answer is it's both. And we've been consistent with that in all the properties that we've sold that are commercial properties, in that we establish a scoring criteria that attempts as much as it possibly can, when we're looking at something subjective, when we get into qualitative items, that attempts to balance the value of the offer price versus the value of the development or the proposal that's going to be placed on the site. And those things will weigh off of each other. And so someone who is an affordable housing developer that maybe can't put as much money up front as far as evaluation may have a much stronger proposal as far as the overall impact to the community. And so we do try to establish criteria that lead us to that path, but recognize that it's not a perfect system, but that's why we have a committee that evaluates that, because then we have multiple opinions informing that opinion. And as a group, I think we come to some pretty good conclusions based on our past transactions. So that's kind of how it is as far as then the what we can share and what we can't share. I don't know if we can even answer that yet, because we don't know what we have yet, but.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Director Leininger. I think that's right. We probably can't answer it now, but very generally, it will be an open and public process. But if there is competitive information provided by a bidder that might impair that bidder vis-a-vis other bidders, that information can be shared with council in executive session. It's an express exception to the public meeting. That's a hypothetical. We don't know how it's going to look. And that's Director Leininger's point, which I think is a good one. If I can just speak to the item of compromise that Councilman Baker raised, I think that's a fair compromise. I think if we had a system or if it went back to council for council's approval, I think the contemplation in the ordinance is that would foreclose the opportunity or the need to go through any formal bidding process. So it's an exception to the bidding process to really streamline the sale activity of the administration if the administration came back for final approval from council. So in this case, we're going to have an extensive process. There's probably more efficient ways of doing this, but we want, Director Leininger and the administration wants the input of stakeholders. And so that will involve council. And so I think that the compromise proposed by Councilman Baker is probably consistent with the intent of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thanks. Any further, did that resolve your point, Councilman President Keppel? Okay, Mr. Schackner?
Just for my own edification, Director Leininger, so how is this, like the criteria of what the evaluator is going to be looked at, how is that going to be shared? It's like an RFP light type thing where there'll be a document put out to those who are interested in the property and saying like, this is what we're looking for, this is what or is it like the rubric, what we're grading on type thing, or?
We'll work with the broker to help define what that looks like, but yes, the idea is that consistent with how we've shared how we're going to evaluate proposals, we'll work with the broker to also share that similar information, but through their process. I look at the broker as the marketing arm for this project. They have resources, they have connections. Yes, we do pay a fee for that service, but it gives us access to places that we don't typically have access to through our traditional RFP process. They'll also certainly help advise us and provide us some guidance along the way, particularly as we get back some proposals. But I would look at them that it's going to be as transparent as the city we're running it, because the broker's working for us. They're not on their own doing this, so it's going to be transparent as it always is with anything that we do, but through a private process.
Yeah, just to drill down on that, just like physically, what, because you said similar to, I'm just trying to figure out like what is someone going to receive or be able to look at if they're interested in this property, when they're creating their own proposal.
So they'll have some language that specifies what the city expects in return. So what should be included in the proposal. We're leaving this a little bit more open because to see what we can get from both market rate, affordable, mixed income, even commercial development, depending on which property we're talking about. And then within that, then it'll say, okay, once you submit your proposals, here's when we want your final and best offers. And then when you submit these finals and best offers, here's how we're going to evaluate your criteria. And usually we have some general scoring criteria that looks at the developer's qualifications, looks at the qualifications of their team, looks at then the quality of the proposal, looks at their financials and how financially established they are to take on this project. And then ultimately, then there's also a scoring criteria for the value, for the cost proposal.
Is there like a reference to like the community vision or any
Yes.
other documents and things like
Yes,
that?
absolutely. Yep.
Okay. I'm comfortable with the motion that we have on the table. Actually, I've lost track. We're still pending a vote. So we have, all motions have been passed. Now we're on to the either a new amendment, which I don't think we're making, or...
Amendment's on the table.
Okay, so let's vote on the amendment, all right? So we've had discussion. Any further discussion? I hope not. Hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay. Any further amendments? Or I think maybe better yet, we should move to recommend adoption of the amended ordinance to the full council. Amended and substituted full. Okay, I rephrase. I'd like to move that we recommend the amended and substituted ordinance to the full council for adoption.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, Councilwoman Marks, any thoughts? Okay, thanks. So Director and Mayor, thank you for the collegiality throughout this process. I think the focus on some of these key commercial properties has been merited and worth our time, and it has really been a good tune-up for all of us. Those parcels are strategically important because we have control over them. I'm thinking of the commercial ones on Madison. And if actually there's a gentleman in the audience that he and I worked together years ago when there used to be a theater that lacked a functioning roof, and there was a collapse of the interior roof so bad that the fire department wouldn't go in to put out the fire if after Hurricane Sandy one occurred. So this has been a long time coming, and because Lakewood only has so many vacant parcels for redevelopment, I think this council member anyway feels like we need to make our shots count and be thoughtful and choiceful in achieving our community good, whatever that may play out to be. But certainly the Lawther Center across from the Hilliard Theater property could be a real impactful 1-2 punch on that corridor in an area that's become more and more vibrant ever since we repaved Madison and had Madison on the move. I think it was at the time branded. So with that, I think we voted on the motion. Okay, we have not voted on the motion. Let's go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Normally, I'm better at tracking where we are in Robert's Rules. I will also say, we removed 1450 Bell from this ordinance. We did discuss at the last committee meeting the need for a analysis or an update on usage, vacancy, conditions of the property, how the cash accrual for the maintenance fund is. The last I recall discussing this several budgets back, it was in good shape, and we held reserves to invest in the property, and I'd love to continue that discussion. I've also had the chance to hear from some of the tenants of the building, and they've got some thoughtful plans that they'd love to see, and it doesn't sound like we've gotten very far down the road in getting those considered. I'd certainly like to do that. So, informally, and maybe we bring it back in a formal sense, I'd love to work with the administration to facilitate some of those conversations in the next couple of weeks or a month, potentially.
Mr. Chair, so what we'll do is
Yes.
we'll resubmit the ordinance,
Okay.
and then probably include some language based on what we talked about this evening, on the amendment to Section 3. I will say that regards to the tenant that's in the building looking to expand with the daycare, they have provided notice to the city. It's taking much longer for us because of the fact that the Cleveland Clinic has vacated a space. There are significant changes that we have to make to that second floor space that it has taken a really, really long time to get through the Cleveland Clinic to get to a point where now we know what we need to do, and we've brought in an architect to help design those changes, but it's going to take some time for us to work through that. Because
Okay.
without getting into details, there's a lot of building code issues, but I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that this isn't for a lack of us not being interested in it.
Understood.
There's some significant changes that have to happen. to the
Yeah,
building
and I look forward to
beyond.
learning more and getting the update. And I guess I'll just say for the record, though, I'm still of the mind that this is a key asset for the city and that we should retain ownership unless we have a clear and compelling reason to transfer the property to a private owner. So, but that's the whole spirit of the discussion. So I look forward to the proposal from the administration and us keep working on this. Okay, thank you for all that work, efficient and swift. So now let's turn to ordinances 3-2024 and 4-2024. And members of the public who were here for the previous one, feel free to go home or stay for the exciting Chapter 2 of this meeting. We won't be insulted if you want to move on with your evening. Director Leininger, do you, actually, council members, any preliminary discussions, or can I just invite the presentation? Okay. Let's hear from the administration and/or our expert witness, whom council members may recall is familiar with this building, meaning the City Hall building, in former Planning Director Drew Siley. Welcome back, Drew. Good to see you. Director Leininger.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So this is a really exciting day that we finally get to talk about what's happening with the Board of Education buildings. This has been 5 years coming to get to this point. And we'll kind of walk you through that. Drew can, Mr. Siley can walk you through some of the specifics of where he's been and then really where we're headed. What I want to do this evening is there's 2 ordinances in front of you. The first is to approve a development agreement between the city and Liberty Development, or in this case, LDC Warren, as they're being referred to in the development agreement. And then the other ordinance then allows for, because the development agreement contemplates the establishment of what's called a 41 TIF, and it refers to the section of the ORC, the Ohio Revised Code, which the TIF points to. That TIF actually requires the city to enter into the chain of title in order to establish this. And this process should sound familiar because we recently did this with the Barry Buick site, the Spitzer site, as well as the Studio West, West 117th sites. So that's what the second ordinance does. There will be additional legislation that will come to you, really just in furtherance of the development agreement. And we'll talk about that on a later slide. So I want to go through a couple things at high level, leave room for some conversation, leave time for you to talk to Mr. Siley, and then leave room for some conversations as well. So you're likely all familiar with the site. It's on Warren Road, just anchoring the south end of our downtown, just south of the Mark's Shopping Center across from the post office. These are 2 of the most historic buildings, civic buildings in our community, in the fact that they were the Rockport School and the Grant School. The Rockport School, which is the north building, was built in 1879 and is about 10,000 square feet. The south building is the Grant School. It was built 20 years later in response to really what was a lot of growth that was happening in our community at that time. And so much growth was happening, they even expanded it again in 1905, not long after it opened. Actually, some would argue probably that the addition that you see, that view that you see from Victoria is even better than the original building that was constructed in 1899. So I have a lot of historic photos in here, just kind of showing you the context and really just trying to impress upon you the history of and the importance of these buildings in our community. They were here before Lakewood was a city. That's how far back these buildings are going. They were the first schools in our township, and then the high school was ultimately built across the street where the post office is, and then torn down, of course, some years later. The site, though, has most recently used at the Board of Education offices, vacated in around 2018, when just prior to Liberty, or just after Liberty had acquired the buildings. And Liberty has been working with the city on how to best reposition the properties, and that's really what we're here to talk about here this evening, is one, the historic preservation of these buildings, and then two, the adaptive reuse of them. And by adaptive reuse, we're keeping some office use in them, and with the Rockport building to the north, but then really a rethink of the Grant School and how we can think about that maybe as a residential building. So this is a site plan. Again, there's not a lot of changes happening to the site itself, since this is a historic preservation project. The Rockport School to the north, top of the screen, really staying in the same configuration, being sensitively rehabbed and preserved into an office use. At this time, we don't know who the office user is. Mr. Sally can talk more about that, but construction is actually starting to take place as we speak, with demolition activities occurring in the building. Phase 2 will then be the south building, a phase that we anticipate will begin perhaps later this year, completion in 2025. And that's to take it to 26 residential units. We've left ourselves some opportunity to go, could also go office, but the intention right now is that that building will most likely look to be 26 residential units. So the reason we're in front of you this evening with the request for a development agreement and then really establishment of a couple of incentives and a TIF, tax increment financing district, and a CRA, which is a tax abatement. CRA stands for Community Reinvestment Area, again, pointing back to Ohio Revised Code and some language that's within there. As Liberty got into this project, a preservation and adaptive reuse is very expensive. $360 a square foot is a tremendous amount of cost that's going into the preservation of a building. And that's on the backdrop of what we've already heard us talk about for several years now, and it's still in place today, is inflated construction cost and labor cost, and now with the backdrop of rising or high interest rates. So they've risen. Hopefully they'll get better, but right now the interest rates remain at really what are historic highs, at least for the last 10 to 15 years. The other item that goes into play with this is Liberty Development was successful in not achieving just one historic tax credit proposal or award, but two, one on each building. However, though, that was done in a very competitive environment where we had other projects within the city of Lakewood that were competing for those same tax credits. And so the amount of tax credits that they received was actually quite a bit less than what they would otherwise be available to them. And so that adds an additional financial strain onto the project. So I mentioned the historic tax credits. Mr. Sally can talk about the pro forma and how that takes shape. But really what we see in the pro forma is that the cash flow is really short in the first 10 years. And then it's not all of a sudden that it gets just suddenly better in year 10, but it starts to get better. And then in the long-term view, when taxes then start to take on those taxes, it starts to impact the ability to sustain a reasonable or a rate of return on their investment. So Liberty has taken a very long-term view of this project. They are looking out for 20 to 30 years as far as their total investment, knowing that those first several years, that first decade is going to be really lean. But in order to help get through those first 10 years and really into those out years and help maintain it in those out years, that's where we're talking about some long-term incentives as part of this project. Specifically, what we're talking about in the short term, at least an immediate infusion into the project, is an economic development loan. And so every year, the City Council gives the administration the authority to, through the Economic Development Account, to establish economic development programs. So when projects, we're at the ready, when projects come to us, we can provide loans. Sometimes they're grant, sometimes they're deferred loans, sometimes they're forgivable grant or forgivable loans. In this case, what has been proposed or what's been shown by need in the pro forma is a $500,000 loan that's split across a deferred loan of $300,000 and then a $200,000 of which is forgivable. $200,000 is going into the Rockport building for energy efficiency improvements, and then $300,000 into the overall project for historic preservation. And that's what really is kind of helping those first handful of years, so that there's something in return for the developer. Long-term, though, as we look at the long-term view of this, there's two other requests, and these are consistent with other requests that we've had for the projects I mentioned earlier with Solov, the Solov projects, the Studio West projects, and not unlike what we're talking about with the downtown project. And that's the establishment first of a tax abatement on the residential. It'll be a 15-year tax abatement on the residential. It's 100% tax abatement. On the commercial, because this isn't, without getting too far in the weeds, because this isn't subject to our pre-1994 CRA that we already have in place, the tax abatement will be limited to 75% on the commercial side. And then what will be happening in the background, there will be a 30-year TIF in place. That TIF will really be quiet during the first 15 years because the abatement will be in effect. But then in year 16 is when the TIF will kick in. What happens in a tax increment financing is the developer will go ahead and pay their taxes just as they normally would. They'll get routed to the county. The county basically turns those into payments or payments in lieu of taxes. They come to the city, and the city has instructions on what they should do with that. Because this will be a non-school TIF, the school will continue to receive their portions of the incremental taxes, so their schools will be made whole. The taxes, though, that go to the other taxing agencies will then be redirected back to the developer. And that's consistent, again, with past projects that we've talked about. As far as the development agreement itself, we'll break this out into developer covenants and then the city covenants. One, they have to follow the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. The next set of standards are then really timing restrictions, and these are very important to the city, as you have just seen in correspondence I sent out regarding other development agreements. The developer has expressed a need in order to get this project going. We recognize that need. We also recognize the fact that we have buildings that have been sitting vacant and not producing any type of tax to the community at large, to the city, to our tax agencies for a number of years. And in fact, prior to Liberty development, it was 146 years before any taxes were realized on this property. So we hold these standards very near and dear, and we hold the developer accountable to these. So these lay out what we expect the schedule to be moving forward. And then, consistent with some other development agreements, we use commercially reasonable efforts to ensure that our laborers are paid prevailing wage. They'll work with the Cleveland Building and Construction Trades Council and its affiliate members to ensure that they have an opportunity to participate in the project. And one thing that we bumped this up quite a bit from the participation from past projects, where it's generally running around 10%, is we're requiring 10% participation from minority, women, disadvantaged, and small business enterprises. And that's something that Liberty had offered to us. And then we have some additional items, and most importantly then, the city is indemnified in this as being a partner in the project financially. What the city then provides in exchange for this is the city provides the community reinvestment area, the tax abatement, the 15-year, 75% in the commercial, 100% in the residential. We also provide the TIF. And then we're acknowledging, it's not subject to this process because it's a separate process that we go through. But we're acknowledging that there is a $500,000 loan agreement that supports energy efficiency improvements as well as then the historic rehab of the buildings. What all this means in far as a tax incentive is this. Essentially, what you have on the vertical axis is the annual property taxes, and what we expect is as there's improvements made to the building, property taxes are going to rise, and that's over time, which is on the horizontal axis. So what happens in this tax abatement / TIF arrangement is that the existing property taxes that are being paid today, and there's about $24,000 of property taxes that are being paid, they will continue to be paid throughout the duration of the incentive period. Those taxes will flow to the school district, to the city, to the county, to the metro parks, to the port authority, to all the other agencies that are part of property tax agencies. The incremental property taxes for the first 15 years will be abated by the tax abatement. So there's no payment made, the taxes are simply abated. What happens in year 15 is exactly what I said before, is now the TIF will kick in, the developer will pay their taxes to the county as they normally would, and that will get turned into a payment to the schools, and then a payment that the green is a payment back to the developer. At the end of all this, then basically there's a windfall effect, if you will, and all those property taxes then start to flow to the tax agencies. So before you this evening, there's two pieces of legislation. I've already mentioned those, so I won't repeat that. What you will then be receiving after this, and furtherance of the development agreement, is then an ordinance that actually establishes the tax abatement, as well as an ordinance that establishes the TIF district. That's usually bifurcated as part of our process because there's some legwork we have to do on the TIF in order to enter in and exit the property transfers, and so that'll give us the time to do that, and we'll return. In terms of the taxes and what does this mean, this is just showing the existing valuations and taxes that are on the property. Again, in the middle is what's being paid, so there's around $24,000 of property taxes that are being paid. This is how the property taxes break out and how they flow to each jurisdiction or each taxing agency based on the current approved levies and bonds that are in place. A lot of data on this slide, but essentially what this shows is how then the taxes then materialize and how they're paid out over 30 years. This assumes there's, just for the purposes of being conservative in our estimates, this just assumes that the valuation that's going to go into the property, of which there's about a $5.6 million of construction valuation, that doesn't mean that the county's going to suddenly view this as a $5.6 million building, because a lot of the work that's happening in the building is repair and rehabilitation. It's not, it's deferred maintenance. So it doesn't necessarily add value to the building. So we take a pretty significant discount factor on that. We look at Studio West as a similar property where they had similar investment and ended up at a similar valuation. So the incremental improvement value is what's shown in the kind of this first set of boxes. The next box is then the existing taxes. And then this is what the total tax bill will be when you take the existing taxes and add it to the improved value taxes. What happens then is the CRA abates about $60,000 of the $89,000 tax bill. $24,000 continues to flow. And then there's a little bit of a TIF. I don't want to get into details of that. But then in year 15 is when this this flips over from the tax abatement ends. The schools start to see a little bit of a windfall in the fact that it's a non-school TIF, so the schools will continue to receive their funds, and then the developer will receive the balance of that $89,000 tax bill. So $24,000 continues to flow, $35,000 goes to the schools, $30,000 goes back to the developer. And the whole reason for all of this is because of how the pro forma is set up. So much money is being the cost of construction, the cost of the debt is of such a nature that with the limited amount of returns we can get through rents and through leases, to take on a tax bill of $89,000 just isn't possible. The project is actually financially upside down at that point. And so we defer, we abate these taxes to allow the project to get its feet underneath it, pay off its debt, and then the city and everybody else can continue to receive their tax bill. In terms of a revenue projection then, Since we don't know the office user, we're just taking a very conservative approach to the office user. It's actually 28 units. I had 26 on the previous slide. I apologize. It's 28 units. We only showed 4 jobs in that building right now. It'll probably be more than that. But at least to just show some projections about what we expect in terms of income tax. Over 30 years, we're looking at north of $1 million in income tax. That's assuming no inflation, no anything else included, cost of living increases. That also assumes that everybody's going to be working outside of the city, so only paying a 1% rate. And then you can see on the middle, or in the larger table, what's happening on an annual basis. I'm sorry, on a 30-year basis with what the schools will receive through property taxes, what the city will receive through property tax and income tax, and then what the other agencies will receive over a 30-year period while the abatement and the TIF are in place. And then the outside edge shows what happens in year 31. What's the windfall that everybody will receive in year 31? And this is what that's attempting to show. So this is then the revenue side of the equation. That's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions on this, but otherwise I'd like to give Mr. Siley a chance to dive into his side too.
Why don't we do that? Council members, is that all right? Let's give former Director Siley, Havis Tyhard, a chance to talk so that we don't lose that opportunity. Mr. Siley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. And Sean, thanks for the very comprehensive overview. I'm going to provide a little more of the color commentary of the journey we've been on for the last several years. When we initially made a proposal to the school board back in 2017, we knew about this building. We knew they were looking for new space. They had about 30 or 35 employees and more than 40,000 square feet of building. They knew they're going to try to right-size their operation, the cost of heating and cooling and occupying and all the repairs that the building needed. Unfortunately, and appropriately by the school board, but unfortunately for us, they really liked that idea, but they had to go through a public process, so they took it out via an RFP, and we found ourselves competing with 4 or 5 other developers for the property. In that time, though, we were the only developer of the 4 that were interviewed that proposed keeping these buildings. The proposals from the others were that there was a better development site at 1 acre and 3/4 on Warren Road in the middle of Lakewood. As a result, we made an agreement with the Board of Ed that we purchased the building in, I think, July of 2018 and leased it back to them for about 18 months while they were deciding where their new home, permanent home, was going to be. Part of that conversation at the time was they were interested in having Liberty renovate the north building and that becoming the new Board of Ed permanent offices with some additions. In that time frame, though, while we were discussing that with them through 2020, we had a new superintendent, and I think appropriately they looked at Taft and decided to make that their new home and create some other opportunities there with the preschool and offerings they made. We roll into 2021 as quickly as time goes. We had a user that was interested in taking the entire building. It was back office for a financial institution, and as everyone knows, 2020 is a epic year for all sorts of reasons, especially when it comes to potential office users. And after about a year of discussion and negotiation, they thought better of it and had sent most of their employees home, and we're working away at that. At about that same time in late 2021, as we were looking at repositioning these buildings, we pursued both state and federal historic tax credits. And on our first try, which is not uncommon with the competitive market for state historic tax credits, we missed by just a couple points. What you do is kind of a post-mortem with the state, you make some adjustments, and you go back in an application. We needed to make up a couple points. It's 100-point scoring. Unfortunately, when the next round became available, because they're done on 6-month cycles, twice a year, the East End project came into the mix. So now we were competing with another large Lakewood project that we knew was bigger than ours, and as a result, they would elbow us out of being the highest scoring project in Lakewood. Usually the largest, highest scoring project also get some bonus points that we knew we wouldn't be able to compete. I had reached out to that developer at that time and said, look, we missed by a couple of points. Can you wait one round and let us get in here? There'll be plenty for everybody. They did not take me up on my offer, so we were out for that round and had to wait another 6 months before we could reapply. We also knew that they had a multitude of buildings over there that they might be pursuing tax credits for a number of rounds over successive years. So strategically, we split the project into 2 parcels, the north building, which is a smaller project, and then the south building, which is the much larger building, the Grant School. As a result, we were able to apply in a smaller category. Instead of the intermediate category, we went into the smaller category for the small building. and received an allocation of $225,000, and then applied last year in 2023 and were awarded for the larger building. But because of bifurcating the project, we had to reduce our asks. The state historic tax credit market and the decisions the legislature has made in the recent years about reallocations of funds and including things like affordable housing and then not including things like affordable housing. In order to compete, we had to keep ratcheting down our ask, which in the net analysis, it probably cost us close to $1 million in historic tax credits to this project. Our concern was we were going to be out of contention for potentially years to come with the other larger project continuing to apply, which actually happened. The East End project went back in to ask for an additional allocation. Fortunately, because of some gymnastics that were going on down at the state, they were not eligible in that round, and that's how we came to the top and were able to win the 2023 allocation. As a result, where we are today, these buildings, as Sean said, have been part of the educational history of Lakewood for almost 150 years. And some of the photos he showed, you could see the old high school that used to be across the street. So this was the campus in the middle for primary education. As we've gotten to know these buildings, they have very, very good bones. And we've worked hard now to unwind what's been about 70 years of modifications to the buildings. The school district did a really nice job maintaining the structures of these buildings. But as they needed to, they just made another office, or they put in a drop ceiling, or they painted out the windows. They made those changes in the name of energy efficiency. What we're striving for is actually true sustainability and energy efficiency here. This will, for the first time in that 140 plus years, these buildings will be insulated. They'll have insulated glass. They'll have high energy efficiency furnaces. There will be modern spaces on the interior and preserving all the historic character on the exterior and still have a lot of that charm and pieces. We went to great pains to preserve doors and molding and trim while we were doing that demolition that we will reinstall to keep those character-defining features throughout. As a result, we've come to a place where we're trying to also be competitive in an office market for the north building and in a residential market, that we are not asking for rents that are so beyond the current market that, one, we're exclusionary to all sorts of potential users who want to be here, and we've run ourselves out of being competitive. You know, base rent in an office situation like this is probably $15 a square foot in Lakewood for updated space, plus your net costs on top of that, so you're looking at about $20. And in the rents, despite what you're seeing in downtown Cleveland, you know, being $2.25, $2.50 a square foot, we're trying really hard to keep this under $2 a square foot on the rent side. And as a result, we could start pushing and pulling on some of those things, but we feel like if we can hit those sweet spots, our likelihood of renting all of this and keeping it occupied over time, long haul. Liberty Development's been in business since 1996. We have some of the same tenants since the company was founded. That's important to us, that we keep those long-term relationships. It's also economically more sustainable for us not to have to re-tenant buildings. As Sean mentioned, we shared the pro forma with the administration. Typically a normal return in year one, you're kind of on your equity, we're looking at something that would be at least 10%, somewhere right around there. We're more like a money market account in these. We're more like 2 in the initial. We are a build and hold developer, and that's the only reason this project works, is if we take a 20-year view. We don't get anywhere near that 10% return until we're approaching 13, 14, 15 years of ownership. And that's going back through a refinancing, and that's also socking away money for capital improvements when we have to put a new roof and new furnaces and things like that. So we're taking that truly long view. And we acknowledge that the incentives we're asking for are substantial, but I think, as you can see, and I think Sean's had some additional analysis done here, these truly hit that but-for requirement, that if we didn't have these projects would be financially underwater in year one to do the kind of renovation that these buildings warrant. There's ways we could do this, I guess, with skilled labor that's not as skilled and materials that aren't historically appropriate and reduce cost potentially, but that we're taking a long-term view. We want to make sure these buildings are in good shape for at least the next 50 years and beyond, and that's the level of investment we're making. So we appreciate council considering the support and the investment in the project, but we're excited to be here now. As Sean said, we've started some preliminary at the beginning of the renovation of the north building, and we're ready to begin the south building later this year and have both of these into circulation and be productive parts of the community again by the end of '25. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions council has.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions, but let's open it up. But I do note that former Director Siley hit on preservation, sustainability, affordability, fair wages. Those are pretty important keystones, so he hasn't forgotten what's important in Lakewood City Hall. Director Leininger.
Just, I want to mention a point that Mr. Sally brought up. So, city staff did go through and do our own analysis of the pro forma, and then the request for incentives. We also then took our analysis and gave it to PMC, Tracy Nichols, who just recently retired from PMC, unfortunately. But she went through it as well and confirmed all of the items that we found and agreed that, but for the incentives that are being requested, this project would not be financially viable. So we, as we always do, we go through that financial analysis and have done that and can confirm that this is, the city is providing an appropriate amount of incentive to make the project viable, but not a dollar more.
Okay, thank you for that. Council members, Mr. Schackner, go ahead.
Thank you, and it's good to see you, Mr. Siley, again. I remember touring that building with you. I don't remember exactly when it was, but I remember it was cold and it was post COVID, kind of throwing a wrench into everything. So just a few questions. My first is that it's interesting because you kind of answered my question when you went over the philosophy of Liberty in terms of doing some of these long-term holds and not seeing that return in the initial 10 years. I'm just interested, is that entirely Liberty's kind of business, or do you mix it up a bit to try and subsidize these longer-term holds to keep it going?
Great question. We do mix it up. So we have a variety. We're residential, commercial, and industrial. So we have what I consider more standard details that are mostly new construction kinds of projects that we have a tenant in mind, industrial tenant, for example, or retail. We've done, or residential. Those give us more standard returns. Those kind of keep the lights on, pay the bills, those kinds of things, and put us in a position where we can take on these special projects that aren't right for everybody. They're important to us, though. My partner, Tom Klers, is a Lakewood resident here, and it just gives us that ability. So by being diversified and being a smaller operation, we're able to take on these kind of projects and be patient investors.
And judging by the potential schedule of starting construction later this year, pretty soon, actually, I take it that this piece of the puzzle gets you pretty close. Are you using this to leverage other financing, or is this really what needs to get you there?
So it's important to lenders that these kinds of incentives are in place. It protects that downside. You know, for example, you have a 15-year CRA, and then if it dropped off completely to full taxes in year 16, what does that look like? You know, the challenge in the lending market right now is lenders have money to place, but they're concerned, especially with interest rates and things like that. They've made some moves where typically we would borrow something like 80% of a project like this. They've dialed it back to where they're looking more like 60, 65%. So we're having to come up with more equity, so more cash into the deal. So we have more skin in that game out of the gate. These incentives, for example, the loan, though that's a loan and we have to pay that back over time, the way it's structured in those initial years, we can help reduce that overall borrowing or our equity piece, and that makes the deal more functional, frankly.
Right. And one last question. So judging by the people you were competing with for this property, and judging by the fact that you would be underwater without this financing the CRA or the TIF, without the TIF, it's really the only profitable way to make use of this property is to demolish it and build something completely new.
That's true.
Without any TIF.
That's true. Or do nothing to the building and hope you can have tenants occupy it in a very rustic condition.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Schachter. Mr. Baker?
Thank you, Director Leininger, and thank you, Mr. Siley. I was on Planning Commission when I think it was rezoned to a commercial, and then, because it technically doesn't touch Detroit, so that was the unique aspect of it, and then also designated historic. I believe it should be, yeah, maybe I'll get a little closer. And I left Planning Commission in 2020, so it's been a while, and I'm glad to hear that it's moving. Buttressing Councilman Schachner's point, so is your construction loan, you have the terms, you're ready to execute, and then this will take you to construction?
So we've talked to various lenders, we've traded term sheets with lenders, but we don't have it dialed in right now. As we have these incentives in place, it'll change how we're able to negotiate with those lenders and the size of the overall deal. But that's not to bed yet.
But you have a term sheet, you're negotiating off of it?
We've had discussions over a term sheet with lenders, yes.
Okay, because and I'm also, and in the future, Director Leininger, I know at the council meeting when we referred this to the committee, I asked for all these numbers. Maybe if you could send it on the Friday before the meeting, because it was a lot of good stuff, and I think some of it's even conservative. 4 jobs and 10,000 square feet of offices. Everyone gets 2,500 square feet. That's a lot of space. So maybe you can speak to that, or are these numbers conservative? They seem conservative to me.
So yes, on the office side, it is conservative, and the reason is conservative, because at one point, we were talking with a real estate office that was interested in the site. When you have a real estate office, most of the employees that are not W-2 employees. They realtors pay where they do their closings, and so there was a very limited income tax impact to the city. But the office staff would pay income tax to the city, and so that's why it's as conservative as it is for the office user. But the residential numbers are directly from Liberty's assessment of that as they made their application to the state of Ohio for their historic tax credits. In our opinion, their analysis was sound, so we simply just utilized the overall number that they had programmed and calculated the income tax off of it.
Great, and I would ask that these minutes, or this presentation be included in the minutes. I think it's helpful. I tried to take notes and.
Let's move that right now. I'd like to move that the presentation tonight be included in the record for the committee meeting.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thanks. Keep.
Yeah, because it's really good information, and I like to refer back to it when we think about other projects as well. But kind of parsing out all the numbers, what it looks like is, from a city investment standpoint, this is what it says the investment is approximately $8.9 million, but the construction's 5.6. Could you explain that? Is it that land costs or soft costs, or what is that?
So there's soft costs in there, but then there's also the historic tax credits. We sell those as equity, which are a couple $1 million of the total project. And then it's our cash into the deal too.
Okay, because what I'm getting is that roughly the city's investment is 1.8. Not the present value, but because you got 900,000 from abatement, 485 from TIF incentive, right? And then 500 in loans, but 300 will be paid back, but with no interest. So that's kind of a floating 1.5 to 1.8. I would round numbers.
Yeah, if you look at the overall math of what it pencils out over 30 years, yes, that's what the numbers add up to. However, what the way to look at this is how it balances each year in relation to the overall pro forma and the debt loading that's going on. And so the number will add up to what the number is, but the importance is that the numbers make sense for the project to move forward, and that's what we're trying to get to.
No, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate how thorough this presentation is, and I deal with this sometimes in my day job with some of the more outlying communities, TIF culverts and driveways for fast food restaurants, and that's just not the practice I would approve here at one of 7 council members. But to me, because I think there's a high bar that we need to have for public incentives as a city of Lakewood, but as Councilman Bullock mentioned, this is historic preservation, some incredibly significant buildings, in our community, energy efficiency, and adaptive reuse. So, it does, it's a high bar for me to get, public incentives into a project like this, but I think that what this project will bring. And I also like, in looking at this development agreement, I would like to get into it in a little bit, but the timing restrictions are super aggressive, and that's probably driven by the developer. You also want that too, because you guys came to us last, you didn't come to us first, and I think that's good. So I appreciate that. But this is, substantial completion by August 31st of 2024. That's this year for phase 1. And then for phase 2, substantial completion by December of next year. So that's really quick. Getting into the assignment piece, though, as I read this provision, and I just want to talk about it on the record a little bit. It talks about permitted, because this is, we want Liberty as a long-term owner. We know Mr. Siley, we like them as a landlord. We'd like to have them stay in Lakewood. The permitted assignments are, creditors, lending institutions, LLCs that you create to hold the debt or whatever. But can Director Lang, can you talk about who they might sell it to and what ability we may have to kind of object to that? It's section D, I think. I don't know. It's on page 23. But from what I read it's that if the party has litigation or some default with the city, or they have some outstanding building code violation or zoning code violation in the city, then we can say you can't sell it to them, Liberty. Is that an accurate representation? Because I trust Mr. Siley, but we have to live with it, and he's a businessman, and he's going to do what he's going to do.
My apologies, I'm trying to get to the specific language, so I make sure I'm speaking directly to the point. You said it's number 3 under
It's just page 23, section D.
packet page? or
It's
or
packet
document?
page 27 of the
Yeah.
Packet page 27.
ordinance.
The ordinance, it's in the ordinance packet page, yeah.
So yes, typically we do provide, and I'm going to talk while I'm reading, we typically do provide restrictions on the assignment. For example, in the downtown project, if you recall from the previous development agreement that was in place, there were very very specific assignment rights. And so we do limit the assignment to a certain extent. And generally, that is to, if there is a default, it has to, in that case, we can't step in the way of the lender, so the lender is someone who could take it back. And then basically, they will have to be notified if there's any other transfers. I don't think there's a restriction on any other transfer. We just have to be notified of it, and we can't unreasonably withhold it. But also look across to Mr. Crossman, who is very heavily involved in this as well, to see if I'm missing anything.
No, it's pretty much part and parcel of the development agreements that the city has implemented in the past. We didn't deviate too far from what council has approved in prior development agreements. So this is some language that has been reflected in previous agreements.
Yeah, and just so we can get it on the record, is what it appears as I read this is essentially if the party's in litigation, if the party that Mr. Shiley or his company would like to sell the property
Yes.
to is in litigation with the city, has an outstanding building code violation, so a landlord that we have objected to their kind of business in this city, which I think is appropriate, but I just wanted to talk about it on the record.
Yeah, so the items at the end of that paragraph, items 1, 2, and 3, that's, yes, those are speaking to those restrictions on a future assigner that's not the lender, or assignee that's not the lender.
And then this is not necessarily related to the incentives, but this is related to the, in this, is it zoned so that residents can be on the first floor in this particular location? Do you intend to have residences on the first floor, or is that more of an amenity space?
So we do, and so we have to go to the Planning Commission for that conditional use. It allows it, but the interpretation is the first floor is actually one floor out because we have a garden level that has windows in it, but we're going to go through the Planning Commission process to have that approved.
Great, thank you. I don't have any other questions. I appreciate the administration doing a good job of, I think, anticipating a lot of our concerns. And as was noted before, this property for a long time did not produce any property taxes for the city. It now does, and it still will. Some of it will just go into the equity of the project, which I think for all the project aims are laudable and something the city can support.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Baker. Councilwoman Marks and Keppel. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you, and thanks for being here. I just had a question regarding, with the historic tax credits, I'm not as knowledgeable as my colleagues up here about that, but what happens if, is there any recourse, like with the historic tax credits, if a development does not move forward or doesn't maintain historic integrity, or what happens
Yep.
with those?
So there are consequences. So we accept those credits. The state tax credits are given to you in the year you put the building into service. So the North Building, for example, in 2024, the $225,000, we have to demonstrate that we have met our threshold for qualified rehabilitation expenditure, and that we've performed per the plans that were submitted and approved that meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic rehabilitation. If we don't get the tax credits. If we take the tax credits and we make modification to the building without approval from the State Historic Preservation Office, they can claw those back from us too. The federal historic tax credits, and this runs in a line, are given to you over 5 years. So that's a lesser allocation, but it's broken up over 5 years. So that puts restrictions on the property that at a minimum in those 5 years, we cannot sell the building. We cannot make modification without any additional approvals from the Preservation Office. So it does restrict what we can do with the building.
So what would happen, so I know you talked about the competitive process and that there's a limited amount of historic tax credits available to properties within the city. So if you were to not meet your obligations, or if another developer that received them in a different time period didn't meet those obligations, what happens to those tax credits? Do they become available for other people to apply? They're just gone? How does that work?
So they go back into the overall pool. So then the next round, if you did not perform, and they expire too. So if you have 2-year compliance period to actually perform. So ours for the 2022 allocation, that's why we have to have that North Building completed by the end of this summer. If we don't, we give up those credits. That $225,000 is put back into the general pool. And then in the next competitive round, those dollars are allocated with the other millions of dollars of tax credits.
But they would go back into the general pool for the whole state, or specifically for Lakewood?
For the whole state.
For the whole state, okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, other questions? Councilwoman Marks, any points? Okay. I've got a couple follow-on questions, although I think they're shortened by the previous discussion. So on this slide, following on the line of questioning about conservative estimates, I think this is a conservative estimate, correct? So first of all, we may have more than 4 jobs in the office, but also if they're Lakewood residents, we get a more favorable rate, don't we? If I'm thinking about this correctly.
If they work in Lakewood or they live and work in Lakewood, it's a 1.5% tax rate. If they live in Lakewood but work elsewhere, it's a 1% tax rate because we give a 0.5% credit.
Okay, so this assumption here is for what?
This is for everybody's living, so the 28 residents are living here and working elsewhere, so they're only paying a 1% rate.
And for the office workers?
On 1%, because since they work here, they will pay 1.5%.
Okay, so you're assuming here in the office workers, the 4 office jobs, that they're living and working here, so we get 1.5?
They're just working here. It doesn't matter where they live. If they work here,
Okay.
they pay 1.5.
Okay. Okay, very good. And the, so in other words, the conservative portion is on the first line for residential multifamily. 28 units, we assume 1 job per unit. I guess that would be a plausible.
It's just an annual income per unit.
Okay.
Is what it is. And there's no inflation on that. There's no cost of living increase on that. It's just 28 divided by 3.3 million per unit for 30 years. So it's a very conservative, it's a conservative on purpose.
Anybody
because we
quick
start to
enough with a
inflate.
calculator to reverse engineer what the assumed income, household income is? Sorry, 80 or better?
117,000.
117, okay. But that could increase a bit. So on the bottom chart, so in other words, the value proposition for the cities to get accrue revenue would come from the income tax really, and the schools conversely get through the property tax, and some revenue for the other taxing authorities there. At the completion of the incentive, the city would, I'm trying to read this chart properly, so the property tax for, okay, the right half of the chart shows annual, so we'd have to,
Yeah, I shouldn't mix.
That's
mix
okay,
periods,
that's
but
okay.
if you look at this, so right now, let's use the city as an example. So right now, the city is getting $5,000 in property taxes from the property the way it is. At
and
the
that'll
at the end
more
of
than
the-
triple.
At the end of the TIF, yes, then the property taxes essentially triple.
Okay.
You can carry that math through everyone that's on that list.
Understood. Thank you. And the Councilman Baker, when you calculated the total city investment, you were looking at the 900,000 on the previous slide, and then what from this for the total of?
So it was roughly $907,000 from the abatement, roughly, and they have present values, but this is like the total value, which is different. Present value is lower. And then 485 for the 1,000 for the TIF incentive, and then 500,000 in loans, 300,000 of which is a deferred loan, which will be paid with 0 interest, and 200,000 of which is a forgivable loan. Presumably, if they meet certain benchmarks, it'll be forgivable.
Yeah, so the $500,000 for the loans, but what was it? Was the TIF was another 400,000? Where are you seeing?
Yeah, TIF was 485, if you go back, right here, TIF incentive on the left side of the screen, 485.
Very good.
But the developer may be selling that off for current equity.
Okay, and so the total skin in the game for the city is, according to your analysis,
Yeah.
Yeah, roughly 1.8.
1.8. Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. Okay, and maybe the developer, Mr. Siley, could describe how, so 28 units, what type of residential units? I'm just curious, are these one family, or one bedroom, two bedroom, a mix?
So it's a mix of predominantly one-bedroom studios with, I think there are two bedrooms that we're
Okay.
proposing in there, so.
And are a certain portion LMI units under the CRA or the tax abatement rules?
So interestingly, we had looked at potentially doing this as a low-income housing tax credit project as well, but state legislature's recent moves that you can no longer commingle historic tax credits and low-income housing tax credits. So again, this goes to these incentives, why we're trying to manage that overall rent per square foot to try to stay within market, but be more accessible to a larger pool of potential renters, so.
Okay, so
we're
because of
trying.
the state rules related to the historic preservation, the answer is no, there's not LMI units in this project.
Correct.
Okay. The front lawns on Warren, are those preserved? Is the footprint of the parcel the same? I think the answer is yes, but
Correct.
I wanted to double
Yes.
check. Okay, thanks. And
We asked, though, if we could add a little parking out there, and the State Historic Preservation Office was adamant that there never was and there never should be, so
SHPO's tough, yes.
they are.
I do know that on the bottom left of your slide, that currently is parking for Mark's Plaza, Mark's Shopping Carts. I know this because I drive by regularly, because my kids go to Grant Elementary, so I'm quite familiar with these views. That's not really your issue, but maybe the Ward 2 councilman can work with me on addressing that. I used to be in Ward 2 and worked on that issue quite a lot. Okay, and the point of the assignments clause dialogue, I heard what you're saying, but you're protecting against the potential transfer of ownership. That clause, rather, is protecting against a potential transfer of ownership from a business partner that we don't have in front of us today, and we may not like the quality thereof. Although what I think I'm hearing from Liberty is that you intend to keep and keep this as a long-term, keep and hold property, probably
We do.
a flagship property, right? Because how many of these 1897 buildings?
This is the only one.
Does anybody own?
From 1897, yeah.
Yeah.
But to Councilman Baker's point, the trust but verify, but there are also controls the city has in place as a lien holder with the loan that you're giving us, and also as the manager of the tax incentives. If we don't make good on the conditions in that development agreement, we put those tax incentives at risk, which is significant impact to the project. And so if we're involved, which we plan to be for a long time, but if there are others, they are compelled to follow the spirit of that agreement in order to receive these tax incentives over the next 15 or 30 years.
So that scenario would also include if you voluntarily brought in a new partner So there was an additional owner. Liberty anticipates it'll be here. Of course, none of us can
Right.
predict the future, but it's possible that you could bring an additional owner, co-owner.
We could, and with the assignment that when it's going to an affiliate, right? For example, if we restructure one of the buildings that we do bring in other investors or partners 10, 15 years from now, or we grow as a company and we're bringing, like I'm an owner in this whole project, for example, there's others like me who come in and buy into the project. We may restructure that, assign, create a new entity kind of thing. I think what the councilman was talking about and it protects against is we're assigning it to an unaffiliated partner who maybe has other issues that would be detrimental to the city. And that the city has protections in there to actually step in and say, well, wait a second, you know, this agreement is so explicit on some of these that it says pay your taxes, right? So if we're going to try to assign this to someone who's a tax delinquent actor somewhere in the city of Lakewood, the city has the ability to say, hold on a second, until that's resolved, this can't transfer.
Okay, and Councilman Baker, you were satisfied with the language?
Yeah, I think it's about as commercially reasonable as you can get. I mean, if you try to get too much more prescriptive in assignments, then, you know, they might not want to enter the transaction.
Okay, understood. Okay, I think that's the conclusion of my own questions. And it sounds like we're at the end of City Council deliberation. Do we have any members of the public who wanted to speak? Nope, that's a no and a no. Okay, Mayor and members of the administration, anything further from the Law Department, Planning Department? Okay. I thought it was a very helpful presentation and good refresher of our memories. And also, I'm pleased to be reminded what Mr. Siley mentioned was that of the applicants for the original transfer of the property to the school board owners, that Liberty was the only one that wanted to preserve rather than demo and rebuild. And in addition to everything else, we're talking about this as a character bestowing set of properties on that stretch of Warren. Across the street, there was a unrelated proposal a number of years back to demo one of the office buildings there, and you would just have a gas station and a bunch of hardscape rolling right down into our downtown, and that didn't come to pass partly for those reasons. So keeping these as not only historic but vibrant and functional would really activate and spread kind of the vibrancy of the heart of our community. So I think it's worth the investment.
Yeah, and to that point, Mr. Chair, I do think that, you know, if Mr. Shiley probably shared some of the offers, I'm sure he had lots of offers from places that wanted drive-throughs and quick service and those types of things on that property. That certainly would not fit with the character of Lakewood and what we wanted in that particular location. So that's where I think that the city investment here is worth it. Take what we want, and this is what I want. So as a council, I'm one of 7, and it looks like the administration wants it as well.
Okay, it's well said. All right, with that, I'd like to go ahead and entertain motions to recommend the proposed legislation to the full council. First, we've got ordinance 3-2024. Is there a motion to recommend to the full council that ordinance for adoption?
Second.
Okay, so I'm making that motion, and Councilman Schachner seconded it. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. And then I'd like to move that we recommend to the full council for adoption ordinance 4-2024.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. That brings us to the conclusion of our agenda for tonight. Thank you for the thorough. Felt like we moved quickly, but it also took a while because we had 2 very substantive discussions, and it was good work by the committee and the council members and the administration. So without objection, I'd like to move. Without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.